Welcome to another edition of the Left Hand Path. Here we discuss issues and topics relating to metaphysics, astrology, and astrotheology. The word sinister comes from the Latin for left hand. With a basic understanding of Kabbalah and astrological principles, we can shed light on the occult forces underpinning the globalization project, exposing its sinister progression towards the left-hand path. The concept of left and right wing within the spectrum of politics is probably far older than mainstream academia would have you believe. The orthodox view suggests it originated from the period surrounding the French Revolution, where the king and his supporters were considered as right-wing, while those on the side of the revolution were seen as left-wing. This is all very well. However, when analyzing this concept from a metaphysical and astrological perspective, additional clues to its true origin begin to reveal themselves. First, it is necessary to view the zodiac as two polarities. The first 6 signs from Aries to Virgo represent the right wing of the political spectrum, while the remaining signs from Libra to Pisces are the left wing. As can be seen from the diagram, the middle ground within this political structure is on the cusp of Libra, the balancing scales. The further we deviate from this position, the more extreme the political system becomes in either direction. The top blue half of the zodiac is traditionally viewed as masculine, while the bottom half is feminine and red, reflecting the standard colors adopted by the political left and right within modern politics. When each half is examined in closer detail, some remarkable coincidences stand out. From the liberal position on the cusp of Libra, we can see how the political spectrum on the conservative right-wing arm tallies as we make our way towards the extreme right, with the first 6 houses of the zodiac. The basic concept of conservatism is to conserve the traditions and social practices of people living within their communities, respecting the rights of the individual to own land and property, while sustaining values and traditions which they are familiar with, giving them the freedom necessary to participate unmolested within society and the political process. Conservatism is not so much a philosophy as an attitude, a constant force performing a timeless function in the development of a free society, and corresponding to a deep and permanent requirement of human nature itself. Quentin Hogg, the chairman of the British Conservative Party in 1959. Leo and Cancer are the only signs in the zodiac ruled by the 2 luminaries, the sun and the moon. Here they represent the whole establishment of monarchy, the kings and queens within traditional patriarchal conservatism, where the male heir takes precedence over the female. Cancer is also the fourth house of the zodiac, associated with the home environment. Here the traditional patriarchal structure attributes great significance to the institution of home and family values. As we move further right, away from the rule of the monarchs, we enter into thinking territory influenced by Gemini, the twins. Here we have a small group of minds underpinning the traditional values of conservatism, similar to geniocracy, where the greatest minds of a community are promoted as rulers, where traditional conservative values are upheld by two or more intellectuals with the necessary compassion to generate wisdom. In Taurus, we move closer to extreme conservatism, where even less people have a say in the political system. Being the second house of the zodiac, concerned with personal wealth and material possessions, we find the wealthiest member of the community taking the reins of power. The idea being that with wealth comes responsibility, so those with the most would have the most to lose. Consequently, in order to keep hold of their wealth, whoever becomes ruler must conserve traditions by implementing sensible policies. On the far right, we have the I Am of Aries, where one overriding ruler, usually the most authoritarian and martial-like, takes command. Traditional politics placed fascism at this end of the scale. However, there are different types of fascism, either socialistic or conservative in outlook. Most people's idea of fascism is Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy in the 1930s. In the case of Germany, we saw a combination of a fascistic leader with a national socialistic agenda, bringing elements of the far right in line with their leader's concept of socialism. It is also worth pointing out that Hitler and the Nazis used the idea of the Aryan, Aries, master race to underpin their own brand of superior National Socialism. As Hitler was born on the 20th of April 1889, on the cusp of Aries and Taurus, it made him the perfect choice as leader for the Aryan Aries ideology. There is another aspect of the left and right to consider, which can be defined as either rational or emotional. The first 6 houses of the zodiac, considered here as right-wing conservatism, is the masculine half of the chart, ruled by the sun and the focal consciousness. This represents the rational and logical side of the mind, whereas the left-wing socialistic side of the zodiac, the feminine side, ruled by the moon and the subconscious, represents the emotional side of human thinking. Furthermore, the colors of blue and red, which represent masculine and feminine polarities, are also used to represent either conservative or socialistic values. The left wing of politics is comprised of socialism and communism, where the views and aspirations of the individual become subordinate to the society or community as an organization, with its overriding ideologies and objectives paramount. Here the state makes all the important decisions concerning a person's life, owning most of the land and infrastructure, while the individual is given privileges by the state for services rendered to the state. As we progress past the liberal left of politics, we come to Scorpio, the scorpion, and the house of sex, death, rebirth and transformation. Its motto is I Desire, ruled by Mars, the planet of proactive energy. This is a doorway into socialism and the temptations offered by Lilith in the form of sexual promiscuity and free love for all. It is where traditional values and old school cultural behavioral patterns become transformed by socialistic ideologies. In Europe and North America, the free love movement combined ideas revived from utopian socialism with anarchism and feminism to attack the hypocritical sexual morality of the Victorian era and the institutions of marriage and the family that were alleged to enslave women. Free lovers advocated voluntary sexual unions with no state interference and affirmed the right to sexual pleasure for both women and men, sometimes explicitly supporting the rights of homosexuals and prostitutes. Socialism and LGBT rights, Wikipedia. As socialism gains ground and develops, it moves into the realm of Sagittarius, the house of higher learning, philosophy, and long-distance travel. This house and sign is ruled by Jupiter, the planet of expansion and optimism. Here socialism will promise more than it can deliver by being over-optimistic as it seeks to expand new horizons into neighboring cultures, infesting institutions of higher learning and the traditional social and philosophical norms of the day. Long march through the institutions of power to create radical change from within government and society by becoming an integral part of the machinery. Rudi Dutschke, 1940-1979, religious socialist. Aquarius and Capricorn represent communism, an extreme version of socialism, where the state has almost full control over the lives of its citizens. The mottos for these two signs are I know and I use, a perfect reflection of how a communist state views its people. It knows better and it uses them to further its own political agenda. These two signs are ruled by the planet Saturn, a planet synonymous with control, restriction, pessimism, frustration, loss, depression, and misery. Satan is the personification of this planet. Together with Moloch, they rule the crown Cliffoth down the tree of death on the left-hand path. The glyph for Saturn is the cross of materialism over the crescent of spirituality, reflecting Saturn's metaphysical orientation, a similar configuration as the hammer and sickle, which is commonly used to represent various forms of communism. At the extreme end of left-wing politics, we find socialistic totalitarianism, where the state has 100% control over its subjects. This is essentially hell on earth, where every person becomes a slave to the system, like George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. The people would only be allowed to live if they submit to their rulers completely. The motto for this house and sign is "I believe," because only someone indoctrinated and programmed to believe without question in the system as a utopian concept would serve it. Diet, injections and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy, because the government will tell them that they are so. Bertrand Russell, The Impact of Science on Society, 1953. Throughout history, humanity has tried nearly every kind of political system on offer, with some disastrous results. The further society deviates from the balancing scales of Libra, the more extreme consequences are inflicted on those people who are unfortunate enough to live under the conditions created. Consequently, as a result of years of trial and error, modern political systems have generally centered around the middle ground, with only marginal differences between their left and right perspectives. This is usually referred to as the 2- or 3-party system. The 2-party system, in general, has promoted stability and steady prosperity within its centrally based parliamentary platform, drifting only marginally from left to right as each round of political theatre eventually loses favour with its disgruntled voters. These parties, on the whole, work together to quash and alienate extreme ideologies which have the potential to cause havoc by undermining the objectives of this system's strategy towards globalization. While the extreme left wing of the political spectrum can be viewed as a journey down the left-hand path, equally the extreme right must therefore be a journey up the right-hand path towards the Creator, a situation where we see monotheism as a theocratic dictatorship imposing the law of the one true God or Creator, expressed through various Abrahamic religions, bearing in mind that God said to Moses, "I am that I am," the same motto as the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, "I am," a sign ruled by Mars, Moses. And God said unto Moses, "I am that I am." And he said, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you." Exodus 3:14. The name Abraham can be viewed as an expression of the first zodiac house of the ram, Aries, as Abram. Thus heaven I've forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. Karl Marx, The Pale Maiden. Although the above quote from Karl Marx was taken from one of his early poems, where poetic license allows for detachment and free expression, one can't help but wonder how much of it is a reflection of his inner workings. Karl Marx was born in Trier, Germany, in 1818, the son of a middle-class lawyer who owned a number of Marcelli vineyards. He was ethnically Jewish, coming from a long line of rabbis, especially from his father's side of the family. His father converted over to Protestantism because laws in Prussia at that time prevented Jews from working in certain professions. As a young adult, he followed in his father's footsteps by studying law at Bonn and Berlin universities. His first year at Bonn was not all that successful, spending more time socializing in bars than attending classes. Consequently, his father moved him to Berlin, away from the temptations of Bonn. At this time, he developed a deep interest in philosophy and politics, admiring the works of the great German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Hegel. After graduating, he went on to successfully attain a PhD in philosophy. However, by this time he had become so radicalized by his left-wing views and associations with various extreme groups that his natural progression into the realms of academia were restricted. He therefore turned towards journalism as a way to survive. In 1841, he began plans to start a journal called Atheistic Archives. However, the project never took off and was forgotten about. The following year, Marx moved to Cologne to work for the Rhineland News, a radical publication which suited his political persuasion, giving him plenty of room to express his socialistic views, while at the same time criticizing and venting his disdain for the right-winged establishment of the day. Consequently, his reporting and views attracted the attention of the Prussian authorities. Marx wrote, "Our newspaper has to be presented to the police to be sniffed at, and if the police smells anything unchristian or un-Prussian, the newspaper is not allowed to appear." This radical attitude towards the right-wing establishment culminated in a critical publication about the Russian monarchy. After reading the article, Tsar Nicholas I asked the Prussian government to remove it from sale, which they did in 1843. Later that year, Marx moved to Paris to co-edit a new radical left Parisian newspaper with the German philosopher and political writer Arnold Ruge. The newspaper was called the German-French Annals. This publication and partnership didn't last long, and by the following year Marx had moved over to begin writing for the Vorwärts, the Forward, the only uncensored bi-weekly radical German-language newspaper still in circulation at that time. It was a publication with strong links to a secret socialist society full of workers and artisans, known as League of the Just. It was around this time Karl Marx refined his views on dialectic materialism, a theory based on the Hegelian dialectic, a dialogue between two or more different points of view to establish the truth, of a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. Whereas the Hegelian dialectic is primarily dependent upon the mind's perception of reality, incorporating a creator, Karl Marx's materialistic dialectic is based around the assumption that human consciousness is a response to the material world, not the creator of it. This is very much understandable when considering Karl Marx was an atheist, someone who did not conceive the creator as the benchmark of all creation. Instead, he was very much a materialist, denying the existence of a creator, while promoting his vision of a socialistic utopia. This all fits together neatly when using the zodiac as a template for political persuasion, where extreme socialism in the form of communism is found in the houses ruled by Saturn, the planet associated with materialism. Saturn, of course, has the same glyph orientation as the famous communist hammer and sickle, the cross of materialism over the crescent of spirituality. While Marx was working on the forward, he met Friedrich Engels, another German socialist philosopher who he formed an alliance with, both eventually becoming lifelong friends. Unfortunately, at this time, in 1845, the Prussian king, Frederick William IV, took a keen interest in neutralizing the threat which was coming from radical leftist movements throughout Europe. This ultimately led to the closure of the Vorwärts, together with Marx's expulsion from France. Losing almost all his capital, Marx fled to Brussels to begin all over again, this time with the support of Engels, who also shared the view that the proletariat, working classes, would one day rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie and ruling classes. Engels later joined Marx in Brussels, where they worked together on numerous projects. In the summer of 1845, they both went to England to study the living and working conditions of the country's working class. On their return, they believed that the time was right for the working classes of Europe to rise up and liberate themselves with a working class revolution. They renamed the League of the Just into the Communist League, promoting it forward from just an underground secret socialist society into an outward political movement. Together they worked on the party's manifesto, which would later become one of Karl Marx's best-known writings, the Communist Manifesto. Published in 1848, its release coincided with a great deal of political turmoil at that time. It was a year, especially in France, of Republican revolts against European monarchs, ending with the Second French Republic and overthrow of the monarch. Riding on a wave of revolution, Marx was accused of being personally involved by the Belgian authorities. He subsequently fled to France before heading to Cologne, hoping the socialist revolution would spread throughout Germany. The King of Prussia once again introduced severe countermeasures against leftist revolutionaries and Karl Marx was ordered to leave Germany. After months of avoiding the authorities, he eventually found refuge in England, where he spent the rest of his days stateless, living in London. Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto became the benchmark for almost all the world's far-left socialist and communist movements throughout the 20th century. It is worth pointing out that the sign of Aquarius has a shared rulership. In old astrology, Saturn ruled the whole sign, but recent astrology gave the first 1,000 years to Uranus, the planet of rebellion and revolution. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto, Chapter 4. The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labour, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity and independence. Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto, Chapter 2. Anybody who knows anything of history knows that great social changes are impossible without the feminine foment. Social progress can be measured exactly by the social position of the fair sex, the ugly ones included. Marx Engels Correspondence, 1868. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of the soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. The criticism of religion is, therefore, in embryo, the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo. Works of Karl Marx, 1843. In 1914, at the start of World War I, a Marxist revolutionary movement sprang up in Germany, attempting to overthrow the old order in favor of a communist revolution. However, although they tried 3 times, the right-wing opposition in Germany was too strong. The name they chose for their organization was the Spartacus League, the same name Adam Weishaupt gave to himself as head of the Illuminati. For socialism, communism to thrive, all those values, traditions and ideologies associated with the right need to be replaced by leftist values. This is one of the main reasons why traditional concepts of masculinity, logic and rationality are attacked and undermined in favor of feminism and emotional rhetoric when promoting socialistic policies. This is exactly what we see throughout the world as the globalization project moves into high gear, undermining old nation states together with their traditional values concerning gender and the role of the family as a whole. As a collective, our wants and needs are also coming into question, being socially engineered as the globalists' program of sustainable development, Agenda 21, is expanded throughout the world. The number of leftist organizations and movements dedicated to either undermining the right or promoting the left is on the rise. A new form of politics is emerging, one in which emotions are taking precedence over truth, facts, and rational arguments. It is becoming fashionable to take offense at the slightest form of displeasure, opinions which do not fall in line with the left's latest view of how their perfect socialistic utopia should be. A vision of a brave new world offered to them by various sponsored groups and think tanks working for left-wing interests. Many forms of united spirituality, especially those attempting to climb the tree of life, find themselves being targeted for division, decimation, and finally elimination, confirming Karl Marx's suggestion that religion is no friend to the overall happiness of those living within a communist system. Leftists who rely on emotion to bolster their political argument also rely on the expansion of state power to protect their fragile emotions. The underlying purpose behind cultural Marxism is to make society so divided, diabolos, divide and abolish, that it can be easily conquered by state forces, a situation which ultimately leads to totalitarianism. The top half of the zodiac can be viewed as masculine, representing a patriarchal political system within the realms of traditional conservatism, where the majority of monarchs would place the first male child as heir to the throne, essentially demoting females as second-class citizens. Over time, as many societies evolved, becoming more sophisticated, some people began to question unfair discrepancies between the sexes in certain aspects of life. This gave rise to a variety of feminist movements, promoted by certain issues of the day. Although liberal feminists adopted a balanced approach towards an end to patriarchal rule, radical feminists aligned with the far left demanded that their liberation should pervade over all aspects of society. Consequently, because some of these left-wing movements were deeply rooted in socialistic ideologies, they were utilized and sponsored by outside interests who were trying to undermine the power base and values of the traditional right. There are now so many feminist offshoot movements that many fight among themselves, unable to agree on the vast spectrum of subjects which some have become fanatically and emotionally attached to. Any organization demanding recognition and or a change in the law, especially concerning the overturning of traditional conservative values, generally fare better under a powerful regulated socialistic system than they would under right-wing policies. This is the main reason why you rarely see far right-wing feminists. The ultimate goal of the demiurge is to draw humanity away from the traditional laws of nature, laws put in place by the Creator, which led to a variety of expressions of divine consciousness. The demiurge, along with his archonic entourage, being empty husks and cyborgal in nature, naturally require the human species to evolve into entities like them, a prospect where we would drift so far from the Creator that all our natural variations and differences would be ironed out, creating a monoculture of gender-neutral automatons living in an open-air prison, a communist utopia of self-imposed, self-regulatory political correctness. During the latter half of the 19th century, a number of collectivist movements and groups of socialists began to appear, believing that human civilization would only survive and advance under a global collectivist system, a system which would be organized top-down and controlled by people like themselves. In this future world, the majority of the citizens have no inalienable rights. Instead, they are given privileges by those in control. Essentially, they are only born to serve the greater good of the collective. There were two basic camps of socialists, both with similar goals, but with entirely different approaches. The Marxist group saw a fast revolutionary approach as the best way to bring about change within society. However, this method was only suitable in countries where democracy was weak, where the people had already acclimatized to mild forms of dictatorships. The other camp preferred a slower approach, using various methods of covert persuasion. These included propaganda, legislation, education, and media to socially engineer a nation's population around to their way of thinking. They understood that societies with strong participatory democracies would put up resistance to rapid changes which would erode their basic rights and freedoms away. Therefore, they concluded that most of these old democracies were to be infiltrated slowly, adopting a slow march through the institutions, where changes would go unnoticed by the majority, who were preoccupied with sport and entertainment. This group are known as Fabians, a semi-secret socialist society who adopted two symbols to reflect their organization's overall strategy: a turtle and a wolf in sheep's clothing, named after the Roman Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, a general who became famous for avoiding direct military engagements, instead preferring wars of slow indirect attrition. Fabianism, or Fabian strategy, has come to mean a gradual, slow, cautious approach to a political situation. Both these groups work together to control world populations, aiming to bring about a unified global collectivist society. The Marxist-Leninist camp made great gains throughout the East, sponsored by international financiers, using communism as an expression of their socialist collectivism, predominantly in the Soviet Union and China. The Fabians, on the other hand, had to be patient. They had to develop strong influences at all levels of government and society. Based in London, they nurtured many offshoots and socialist organizations, groups which sprang up across the globe promoting collectivism. The Fabians are wolves in sheep's clothing, whereas Marxist-Leninists are wolves in wolves' clothes. Many prominent Labour Party politicians have been members of the Fabian Society, including Ramsay MacDonald, Clement Attlee, Tony Benn, Harold Wilson, Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown. Other famous Fabians include George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and Bertrand Russell. Collectivists see the state as the new God, the new emperor, the new religion. Their aim is to mold your individuality to fit within the parameters set out by the state. You must serve the state to justify your existence, otherwise you would be viewed as an unworthy misfit or a homegrown terrorist, a threat to the legitimacy of statism and the overall collective. Their new definition of extremist would be anyone who challenges their established order, no matter how extreme that order becomes. All subjects within this new social order would be restricted within a narrow band of experiences offered to their perception of reality, limiting the natural biological relationship they could have with the Creator, who offers an endless stream of unlimited possibilities. These restrictions would limit freedom, liberty, and most unique forms of self-expression. To achieve their objectives, the collectivists have their members actively perverting media, politics, education, history, and science, with the aim of advancing their ideology, firmly believing that the final end product justifies their interim lies, manipulations, and deceptions. We are told that man is responsible for climate change. We are told who our new enemies are, those who we should fear and fight. We are told that we must give up our freedoms for security, give up our sovereignty for harmony. We are told that austerity is necessary, that there is no more money for our communities, but on the other hand, we see plenty of money for war. We are told to be vaccinated and that GMOs are safe. We are conditioned to accept the official versions of events and not to question anything. Just keep on shopping, watching TV and eating, and eventually everything will be just fine. The problem associated with all variations of collectivism, whether it is communism, socialism, or globalism, is that they all eventually resort to brute force to maintain power and to perpetuate themselves. David Rockefeller, an agent for the international financiers, expressed his admiration for the collectivist experiment in China under Chairman Mao, fully aware that at least 45 million people had been worked, starved, or beaten to death in the process. Mao is probably the greatest mass murderer in history. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded, not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering a high moral and community purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. David Rockefeller, New York Times, 1973. To the globalist, the human cost involved in this collective experiment is not an issue. This is why George Bush and Tony Blair can take their countries to war on lies. They are not interested in the truth or the lives of those killed in the process. Their overall mission is to force through the next phase of globalization, making it plausible to the public. It is their job. They are just public relations men for the real power behind what we call our governments. They are henchmen of the demiurge. They would not have been allowed to occupy their place in the political system if their views and thinking ran contrary to the globalization project. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the West has become more like the East, and the East has become more like the West, merging the two variations of collectivism towards unification. Once practical parity has been achieved, sometime in the near future, a new level of global administration will emerge from some manufactured crisis, a new tier of bureaucracy out of reach of most people whom it will supposedly represent and control. In 1948, another Fabian, George Bernard Shaw, wrote, "I am a communist, but not a member of the Communist Party. Stalin is a first-rate Fabian. I am one of the founders of Fabianism, and as such, very friendly to Russia." George Bernard Shaw, 1948. The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution. David Francis, American ambassador to Russia at the time of the revolution. The schemes of the international Jew, the adherents of this sinister confederacy, are mostly men reared up among the unhappy populations of countries where Jews are persecuted on account of their race. Most, if not all of them, have forsaken the faith of their forefathers and divorced from their minds all spiritual hopes of the next world. This movement among the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. Winston Churchill, Zionism versus Bolshevism, The Sunday Herald, 1920. This enabled Jewish financiers to become the agents of national loans, a form of business which they encouraged wherever possible. The Jew has always desired to have nations for his customers. National loans were facilitated by the presence of members of the same family of financiers in various countries, thus making an interlocking directorate by which king could be played against king, government against government. And the shrewdish use made of national prejudices and fears, all to the no small profit of the fiscal agent. And this tendency, which served the race so well throughout the troublous centuries, show no sign of abatement. Certainly, seeing to what an extent a race numerically so unimportant influences the various governments of the world today, the Jews who reflect upon this disparity between his people's numbers and their power may be pardoned if he sees in that fact a proof of their racial superiority. Henry Ford, The International Jew. At the same time Karl Marx was making his presence felt within the political chaos spreading throughout Europe, an American author, journalist, lawyer, brigadier general, and prominent 33rd degree Freemason by the name of Albert Pike was also forging an impressive legacy westwards in the new world of the American colonies. Apart from having a decorated military career, Pike became one of the most senior members of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, holding the title of Sovereign Grand Commander for 32 years. In this capacity, he would be fully aware of the overall agenda and objectives of international Freemasonry as a whole. For decades, it has been alleged by numerous researchers throughout the alternative media that a letter dated the 15th of August 1871 was sent by Albert Pike to Giuseppe Mazzini, an Italian politician and the then head of the Illuminati, who took over from Adam Weishaupt, purported to have been displayed in the British Library up until 1977, after which the letter was never seen again. However, the British Museum denies these allegations. The correspondents are said to have outlined plans for 3 major global conflicts, which were necessary to bring about a one-world government, although it is likely that the existence or authenticity of these letters are bogus. Whoever wrote them appears to have an informed understanding of the overriding objectives of the globalization project. The document allegedly suggested World War I was planned to overthrow the Tsars in Russia and make the country a communist stronghold. The Second World War was sparked as a catalyst to destroy Nazism, according to the letter, so communism could take over warrior governments and for a sovereign state of Israel to be set up in Palestine. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agenda of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. We must pass through the darkness to reach the light. Albert Pike. Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect, and uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth, which it calls light, from them, and to draw them away from it. Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a book which was first published in Russia in 1903. The unknown authors claimed that it contains and is based around minutes taken from a meeting of Jewish leaders sometime at the end of the 19th century. who were discussing a plan for global Jewish hegemony through the subversion of Gentile social structures which dominated most societies at that time. To achieve this, they needed to control the world's economies, the world's media, and almost all its institutions. Although the book was taken seriously at that time by a large number of influential figures, one of which was Henry Ford, who funded the printing and distribution of 500,000 copies throughout the United States. The book was eventually exposed as a fraud from the perspective of its purported origins. However, the book was not alone. Much of the protocols of the Elders of Zion was plagiarized from earlier works, largely written by authors with a grudge against aspects of Judaism and Jewish communities as a whole. Many of these authors were convinced of an international Jewish conspiracy to take over and control the world. This coincided with the creation of organized political Zionism, championed by Theodor Herzl, a movement which tried to unite the Jews towards aspirations of returning to the Promised Land. The anti-Zionist movement, which sprang up in opposition to the Russian Zionist Congress of 1902, was suspected of being the mastermind behind the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Initially designed as an internal parody memo mocking Jewish ideology, it was later modified into book form. In the mid-19th century, a Russian Jew from Minsk by the name of Jacob Brafman fell out with a number of members of the local Quell. As a result, he turned against Judaism, converting instead to Russian Orthodox Christianity. Being a writer, he authored many polemics against Judaism, the Talmud, and the Quell. In 1868, he published a book called The Local and Universal Jewish Brotherhood, stating that the Quell still exists in secret as an international conspiratorial network, with the ambition to undermine Christianity and take control of all property while seizing power. The following year, he published another book entitled The Book of the Quell, exposing more about this secret shadow government working as a state within a state. The book was translated into English, French, and German, and was taken seriously by a number of influential figures and officials. This ultimately added more fuel to the already fragile relationship between Jews and Gentiles living in Russia and Eastern Europe. Consequently, many Jews suffered harsh treatment through various pogroms which erupted around this time. Other books plagiarized by the protocols of the Elders of Zion were Osman Bey's 1878 book, The Conquest of the World by the Jews, and Hippolytus Lutostansky's The Talmud and the Jews, 1879, in which he claimed the Jews wanted to divide Russia amongst themselves. It is inevitable that under our new laws governing anti-Semitism, together with today's coordinates concerning political correctness and hate speech, that old books of this nature should be recategorized in an attempt to distance today's readers from the perspective and circumstances of the times they were written. At that time, the rise of communism was of great concern to most systems of governance, with aging monarchs putting contingency plans in place against future socialist revolutions and communist takeovers. Quotes from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Meantime, however, until we come into our kingdom, we shall act in the contrary way. We shall create and multiply free Masonic lodges in all the countries of the world, absorb into them all who may become and who are prominent in public activity. For in these lodges we shall find our principal intelligence office and means of influence. All these lodges we shall bring under one central administration, known to us alone and to all others absolutely unknown, which will be composed of our learned elders. The lodges will have their representatives who will serve to screen the above-mentioned administration of Masonry, and from whom will issue the watchword and program. In these lodges we shall tie together the knot which binds together all revolutionary and liberal elements. In order to give the Goyim no time to think and take note, their minds must be diverted towards industry and trade. Thus, all the nations will be swallowed up in the pursuit of gain, and in the race for it will not take note of their common foe. But again, in order that freedom may once for all disintegrate and ruin the communities of the Goyim, we must put industry on a speculative basis. The result of this will be that what is withdrawn from the land by industry will slip through the hands and pass into speculation, that is, to our classes. We must compel the governments of the Goyim to take action in the direction favoured by our widely conceived plan, already approaching the desired consummation, by what we shall represent as public opinion, secretly promoted by us through the means of that so-called great power, the press, which, with a few exceptions that may be disregarded, is already entirely in our hands. The Goyim are a flock of sheep, and we are their wolves. And you know what happens when the wolves get hold of the flock. The citizens of nations are stupefied with alcohol and drugs. Their youth have grown stupid on classic literature and novels, and from immorality learned at early ages. That immorality was taught to them by our special agents, teachers, mindless servants, governesses in the houses of the wealthy, by ecclesiastics and others, also by our women in the places of dissipation commonly used by the citizenry. In all corners of the earth the words liberty, equality, fraternity brought into our ranks whole legions who bore our banners with enthusiasm, all thanks to our blind agents. That abstract illusion called freedom that we have used to infect the minds of the mob in all countries, we have used to convince them that they are the ones that choose their government. It has also enabled us to make the mindless mob think that they are the true owners of their country, and that their government is only their elected servants and can be replaced like a worn-out glove whenever they desire. In order that the masses themselves may not guess what they are about, we further distract them with amusements, games, pastimes, passions. Soon we shall begin through the press to propose competitions in art, in sport of all kinds. These interests will finally distract their minds from questions in which we should find ourselves compelled to oppose them. Growing more and more disaccustomed to reflect and form any opinions of their own, people will begin to talk in the same tone as we, because we alone shall be offering them new directions for thought. Oxford Dictionary definition of anti-Semitism: hostility to or prejudice against Jews. I know thy works, and tribulation, and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews, and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Revelation 2:9. Jews are described as an ethno-religious group. This means they are an ethnic group of common ancestry, race, who share the same religious beliefs, that of Judaism. Their origins go back a long way, and some traditional scholars believe they are the descendants of Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, hence the term Shemites or Semites. Prior to World War II, they made up 0.7% of the world's population, around 16.7 million people. In reality, they are a mixed multitude of people from many areas, converging under the umbrella of Judaism. In recent times, the term Semite has evolved from being a racial concept into the more preferred linguistic and cultural classification. The descendants of Adam and Eve eventually led to Noah, who at the age of 500 became father to his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. As the population of the earth at that time increased, the sons of the gods saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they would marry whoever they desired. As time went by and the human population increased, the god gene or spirit became diluted. They essentially became less godly and more animalistic. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:3-8. When analyzing the different types of Jews, it becomes clear that the term anti-Semitic is slightly misleading, because the original Semites only make up a very small percentage of the overall worldwide Jewish population. The majority, around 80% of those who consider themselves as Jews, are from the Ashkenazi lineage, which by all accounts appear to be no more genetically related to the original Semites than the rest of us. However, this is still a topic of debate, even among some of the best scholars in the world. The other aspect to consider is that the original descendants of Shem, who initially lived in the region of Canaan, became known as Canaanites, a group of people who also consisted of many variations of Arabs. The Bible refers to the original inhabitants of this area as a mixed multitude. So it was, when they had heard the law, that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. Nehemiah 13:3. Biblical scholar Mark Smith notes that archaeological data suggests that the Israelite culture largely overlapped with and derived from Canaanite culture. In short, Israelite culture was largely Canaanite in nature. Wikipedia. This suggests that the original term Semite includes a number of Arab inhabitants who also lived within the area at that time. Consequently, the phrase anti-Semite has been redefined in recent years to specifically refer to Jewish people as a whole. The problem with this is that many of today's Jews no longer practice the old religious traditions associated with Judaism, adhering to its strict teachings of the Torah. Instead, many of today's Jews have evolved into living more of a modern secular lifestyle, while still considering and labeling themselves as Jews. However, the Bible suggests that being a Jew is more to do with a state of mind than an outward appearance. This tallies with the teachings of Kabbalah, where the individual has to make a conscious decision whether to walk the pathways within the tree of life or descend down into the realms of the Qliphoth towards a dark, materialistic and spiritless existence on the tree of death. For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of man, but of God. Romans 2:28-29. As traditional Judaism is associated with Bina, the messianic Sephirot within the supernal triad on the tree of life, expressed on earth as various areas within the Holy Land of Israel, it is in the interest of atheistic and satanic cults to undermine all forms of spirituality associated with all aspects of the tree of life, especially traditional Judaism located within the Holy Land. We have already established that Frankist and Sabbatean Jews, who could be referred to as Qliphotic Sabbateans, were essentially in opposition to traditional values of righteousness and spirituality, which underpinned Orthodox Judaism, and that many of their offshoots infiltrated high society through secret organizations in order to undermine right-wing conservatism and replace it with a new global socialistic collective. Zionism appears to be another one of these organizations, a political ideology hiding behind Judaism for the purpose of building a new temple in Jerusalem to their materialistic god, the Demiurge. The majority of people either have no idea of what Zionism is, or they have a distorted view of its true nature and history. A call for a return of Jews to Palestine has a long history. Modern Zionism was created by elements within the British establishment to further the ambitions and aspirations of the British Empire and the international financial cliques partnership. Their objective was to create a colonial controlled outpost in the Middle East, populated by Jews who would see it as a return to their ancestral homeland. The outpost would be a strategic, commercial, and military base for further imperialistic expansion, using the Jews as a mechanism to drive a wedge between the Arab Muslims and other colonial powers in the area, all seeking to advance their own political or religious ambitions. Palestine is situated between Asia and Europe. Whoever controls that area would control trade routes between the two. They would also have access to important oil fields. The only problem was how to get the Jews to go along with the idea. Zion is a term used to describe the area around Jerusalem. Zionism is a political philosophy, a call to relocate Jews from all over the world and place them back to where they supposedly came from, the promised land mentioned in the Old Testament, between the Nile and the Euphrates. In the middle of the 19th century, the British Empire, at the height of its power, was concerned about economic advancements being made by its competitors. The empire had become masters of the seas, protecting their trade routes and defending their ports with a superior navy which ultimately controlled 1/3 of the Earth's surface. Their competitors, on the other hand, were industrializing inland. The United States, France, Germany, and Russia all posed a potential threat to the British economic dominance, especially if they all united against her. The French had completed the Suez Canal in 1869, enabling goods to flow easily between Europe and Asia. Bismarck had unified Germany in 1871, which encouraged the industrialization of internal transport links, making it easier for other empires and republics to compete with the British. The empire would do all they could to keep themselves in control, especially by undermining competition in specific areas. Palestine was one of those strategic regions. Its importance became more pronounced after the Suez Canal was opened. The idea of Jews returning to their homeland is an old one. From the Exodus out of Egypt to the Babylonian conquest of Judea in 641 BC, Jews have been encouraged to go along with this notion. Even during the annual Passover celebrations, some Jews end their prayers with "next year in Jerusalem." Daily prayers, another powerful repetitive mechanism used to cement a belief system, include references to "your people Israel, your return to Jerusalem, and a Redeemer shall come to Zion." The persecutions of Jews also has a long history. In Spain and Portugal, many were persuaded to adopt the Christian faith, while secretly keeping the Judaic traditions alive. The Catholic Church, suspicious and intolerant, initiated the Inquisition, and by 1492 had expelled the remaining Jews. In 1516, Venice decided that Jews had to live in secure ghettos. They also had to pay a tax for the privilege. And by 1555, the Pope in Rome followed suit. Jews had already been expelled from England in 1290, only to be allowed back in 1649 under Oliver Cromwell. At the end of the 17th century, Judah Hasid Segal Halevi, a Jewish preacher, traveling from one Jewish community to another, persuaded a number of Jews to participate in a new aliyah, the immigration of Jews from the diaspora to the promised land of Israel. By 1700, he had assembled 1,500 for the long journey, but a third of them died along the way. When they reached their destination, they were broke and found they were not altogether welcome. At that time, there were only around 1,200 Jews living in the city. So the sudden arrival of another 1,000 new Ashkenazi Jews created a massive problem. The newcomers, viewed with hostility, got into debt, trying to build a new synagogue, and by 1720 their Arab creditors set fire to the building and took back control of the land. The Turkish authorities blamed all the Jews collectively for the mess and banned the Ashkenazi Jews from the area. The Jewish population within the Holy Land steadily increased after the Christian persecutions of the Reconquista. Following Napoleon's conquest, laws were brought in to emancipate Jews throughout Europe, which helped in the decline of their persecution. Britain gave Jews equal rights in 1856, and so did Germany in 1871. During the competitive age of nationalism and expanding empires, Jews ceased to be persecuted for their religious beliefs, but instead were seen as a different race altogether. Anti-Semitism took over from the simple disapproval of Judaic Saturn worship. The British established a consulate in Jerusalem in 1838, which at the time was ruled by the Turks and governed from Istanbul. The following year, a report was published about the conditions of Jews in the area. A memorandum followed which encouraged European monarchs into supporting the idea of restoring Jews back to Palestine. In August 1840, the Times of London reported that the British government was considering the restoration of a Jewish homeland, and that both Lord Shaftesbury and Lord Palmerston were instrumental in its promotion. Lord Shaftesbury was a proactive advocate for Zionism as early as 1820, motivated by an evangelistic revival which took place between 1820 and 1830. Napoleon in 1799 saw the strategic importance of the area for his own empire. He considered helping the Jews back to Palestine and prepared a proclamation to this effect. It was only his defeat at Waterloo which put an early end to this proposal. There was also the Muslim threat under Muhammad Ali, who by 1832 had united much of Palestine and Syria. He also began to industrialize the region with the intention of turning it into a modern state. Ali also established an Egyptian-French alliance which made it necessary for the British to champion the cause for relocating the Jews back to the Promised Land in order to gain a foothold. Benjamin Disraeli was a British politician and writer who came from a wealthy family of Sephardic Jews. He was British Prime Minister twice, once in 1868 and again in 1874 to 1880. As a pro-Zionist with close ties to the House of Rothschild, he was able to bring the Zionist dream closer to fruition. Lord Stanley, a Freemason and Conservative Party politician, mentions visiting Disraeli in his diary in January 1851. He talks about Disraeli's ideas for the restoration of the Jews to Palestine. With a string of pro-Zionist and pro-Rothschild writings behind him, Disraeli seemed to be the ideal candidate to turn this idea into a reality. In 1862, the Prince of Wales, future King Edward VII, a Freemason, made a visit to Palestine and the Holy Land, not only representing the state, but also to do some groundwork. After the defeat of the British-backed Confederates in the American Civil War, momentum gained for the Zionist project. In 1865, the Foreign Office began preparations for resettlement. A fund called the Palestine Exploration Fund was created, backed by both Oxford and Cambridge universities, along with money from Freemasonry. This exploration fund produced a practical plan to make the country habitable for resettlement. With the construction of the Suez Canal, the potential threat to British preeminence was aired by Lord Palmerston, 2 times British Prime Minister. I must tell you frankly that what we are afraid of is losing our commercial and maritime preeminence, for this canal will put other nations on an equal footing with us. At the same time, I must own that we are not quite easy on the score of the designs of France. Of course, we have every confidence in the loyalty and sincerity of the Emperor, but who can answer for those who will come after him? In 1862, Moses Hess, a German-French Jewish philosopher and associate of Karl Marx, wrote a book called Rome and Jerusalem, the Last National Question, in which he calls for the creation of a Jewish socialist state in Palestine. In the latter half of the 19th century, various socialist movements sprang up, each one targeting different social and political aspects of society. The Fabians, the Marxists, and Hess's Zionist socialism were all organized ventures promoted to influence the future direction of humanity. In an effort to control the Suez Canal, Disraeli and the Rothschilds arranged to purchase the Egyptian ruler's portion of shares, placing them under the control of the British government. In the late 1870s, Jewish philanthropists helped to finance an agricultural resettlement program for Russian Jews who were desperately trying to flee persecution in Eastern Europe. The Rothschilds came to their aid, sponsoring many new settlements in Palestine. In 1877, Disraeli created a blueprint for a Zionist state, which would be under British rule, ensuring political and economic penetration in the region. In his book, Alroy, Disraeli reveals what was on his mind. "Sire, bear with me. If I speak in heat, I speak in zeal. You ask me what I wish. My answer is a national existence, which we have not. You ask me what I wish. My answer is the land of promise. You ask me what I wish. My answer is Jerusalem. You ask me what I wish. My answer is the temple. All we have forfeited, all we have yearned after, all for which we have fought, our beauteous country, our holy creed, our simple manners, and our ancient customs. An interesting point to make regarding Suez is that its name is Zeus, spelt backwards. When dividing the whole globe into 12 signs of the zodiac, using the old prime meridian of Giza as the benchmark, Pisces falls west of Giza and Aries to the east. Jupiter Zeus is the ruler over Pisces, ruling the land west of Giza, Aries to the east and the opposite end of the zodiac. Suez is a reflection of that opposition. The British, with the will and financial backing, needed a man who would promote their Zionist cause, a man who would successfully convince the Jewish community of the merits for returning to the promised land. The man they approached was Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was born Benjamin Zeev Herzl in Pest, East Budapest, Hungary in 1860. His parents were German-speaking assimilated Jews. His father, Jacob Herzl, was a successful businessman. Theodor's conversion to Zionism was purported to be around the time of the Dreyfus Affair in 1894. While he was working as a reporter in Paris, he witnessed anti-Semitic protests erupt following the arrest and conviction of a French Jewish army captain who was accused of spying for the Germans. This persuaded him to reject Jewish emancipation and embrace the notion of moving all Jews out of Europe and into Palestine. In 1889, Theodor Herzl married Julie Nashtua, the daughter of a wealthy Jewish businessman, and moved to Vienna. In those days, high society in Vienna socialized in a network of salons set up by Julie Rothschild, the daughter of the Viennese branch of the banking dynasty. Those salons were recruiting grounds for secret societies and ISIS cults. Herzl was known to be a regular patron. On March the 10th, 1896, Herzl was visited by Reverend William Heckler, an Anglican minister working for the British Embassy. Heckler was familiar with Herzl's publications on Zionist issues. This meeting would be the turning point in Herzl's career. He wrote in his diary, "Next we came to the heart of the business. I said to him, Theodor Herzl to Reverend William Heckler, I must put myself into direct and public known relations with a responsible or non-responsible ruler, that is, with a minister of state or a prince. Then the Jews will believe in me and follow me. The most suitable personage would be the German Kaiser." Heckler arranged Herzl to meet Frederick I in 1896, which led to an audience with Wilhelm II in 1898. This gave credence to Herzl's movement in the eyes of the Jewish community. Before Heckler's intervention, most Jews considered Herzl as a lunatic or even a British agent. The majority of Jews considered Zionism to be an assault on Jews and Judaism. This created a split within the Jewish community, with those against the homeland and those for it. The problem was that most Orthodox Jews believed that a homeland could only be given to the Jews by a new Messiah. As Jesus, Jupiter Zeus, was not considered as their Messiah, this instruction to go back had not yet happened. This meant a homeland for Jews throughout the Piscean age was not an option. As Saturn worshippers, their Messiah was not to appear until the new age of Aquarius. It could be argued that the new pseudo or false Messiah for the Zionist movement came in the form of finance from the House of Rothschild, enabling Zionist projects to move forward. Opposition was expressed in the Pittsburgh Platform, a position adopted by the Central Conference of American Rabbis in 1885. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. Herzl came to the conclusion that anti-Semitism would be advantageous for the Zionist movement in the sense that it would make life unbearable for Jews living in Europe, and out of desperation they would eventually move to Palestine to escape persecution. He wrote in his diary, "The anti-Semites will be only too happy to give Zionism publicity. The anti-Semites will become our most dependable friends, the anti-Semitic countries our allies." Herzl regarded Zionism's triumph as inevitable, not only because life in Europe was ever more untenable for Jews, but also because it was in Europe's interests to rid the Jews and be relieved of anti-Semitism. The European political establishment would eventually be persuaded to promote Zionism. Herzl recognized that anti-Semitism would be harnessed to his own Zionist purposes. Benny Morris, Righteous Victims. During the late 19th century, Herzl made regular visits to England. He once again wrote in his diary, "Get at one stroke 10 million secret but loyal subjects, active in all walks of life, all over the world. At a signal, all of them will place themselves at the service of the magnanimous nation that brings long-desired help. England will get 10 million agents for her greatness and influence." Herzl and his colleagues established the World Zionist Congress, an organization which would rally the Jewish people into pushing for resettlement in Palestine. The first Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, attended by 200 participants, who created the first political Zionist agenda known as the Basel Program. Zionism seeks for the Jewish people a publicly recognized, legally secured homeland in Palestine. Statement from the First World Zionist Congress. Herzl wrote in his diary, "Were I to sum up the Basel Congress in a word, which I shall guard against pronouncing publicly, it would be this: at Basel I founded the Jewish state." When Herzl was looking into other possibilities for resettlement, Argentina was one of the options mentioned. When considering this, he wrote, "We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it any employment in our country." He died at the young age of 44 on July 3rd, 1904, from cardiac sclerosis. His remains were moved from Vienna to Mount Herzl in Jerusalem in 1949. Before the creation of Israel, with money supplied from wealthy bankers, the Zionists brought up all the land available for Jewish settlements. This was known as land redemption, or Judifying the land. In 1917, during World War I, the British conquered Palestine from the Turks and legalized the Jewish national homeland concept with the Balfour Declaration. The pro-Zionist British dismantled all Palestinian paramilitary groups, leaving them defenseless and leaderless, paving the way for further Zionist settlements. In Simon Schama's book, The Two Rothschilds and the Land of Israel, Schama speculates that the Rothschilds, through various commercial enterprises, own approximately 80% of the land within Israel. The British Rothschild Zionist outpost, known as Israel, is essentially another commercial and military base for the empire and the House of Rothschild, the richest and most powerful banking consortium on the planet, spreading its tentacles throughout the world while avoiding criticism by controlling media outlets and shielding itself behind Jewish Holocaust victim status. Zionism is just another tool being used to bring about world unity, a global socialist society under the complete control of the Hidden Hand, an international banking consortium headed by the House of Rothschild. Israel today has become the 11th most powerful military force on the planet, and one of 4 countries holding nuclear weapons not recognized by the NPT. They maintain a policy of ambiguity, although their nuclear weapons program was exposed back in 1986 by Mordecai Vanunu, an Israeli nuclear technician who ended up in prison for what they considered as treason. Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense that England belongs to the English, or France to the French. It is wrong and inhumane to impose the Jews on the Arabs. Surely it would be a crime against humanity to reduce the proud Arabs so that Palestine can be restored to the Jews partly or wholly as their national homeland. Mahatma Gandhi. People who call themselves supporters of Israel are actually supporters of its moral degeneration and ultimate destruction. Noam Chomsky. If every single Jew born anywhere in the world has the right to become an Israeli citizen, then all the Palestinians who were chucked out of Palestine by the Zionist government should have the same right. Very simple. Tariq Ali. When modern political Zionism emerged around the turn of the 20th century, most Orthodox Jews opposed it. David Novak. As a buffer against criticism, the Sabbatean and Frankist Jews, aligned with Zionism, used anti-Semitism as a tool to quash dissent. Even though some of their greatest opponents and critics are traditional Tauric Jews, who, being on the spiritual and righteous path, are regarded by Cliphotic Sabbateans as a threat to their inverted ideologies and objectives towards the globalization project. To the average person, all Jews come under the same umbrella, and anyone criticizing any of them in any way can easily be discredited by being labeled as anti-Semitic. Hiding behind victim status, the Cliphotic Sabbateans keep the historical persecutions of both righteous and Cliphotic Jews alive as a defense mechanism against all their opponents. It is worth pointing out here the old motto used by Mossad Israel's secret intelligence agency, a motto which can be translated in a way which underlines the Sabbatean mentality, a motto which was recently changed. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. The other motto which needs mentioning here is the one used by 33rd degree Freemasons, Ordo ab Chaos, which translates as order out of chaos. This can be found within the grand decorations of the Order of the Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, one of the highest rankings to be bestowed on any Freemason. I would suggest that order out of chaos relates to the order they intend to impose from the chaos they help to create, whereas order over chaos relates to man's ability to tame nature while trying to live in harmony with it. Many of these secret organizations and orders work together by sharing information with common objectives. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty and am proud of it. David Rockefeller, American banker and statesman, Memoirs, 2003.